Hello and welcome to today's FP Virtual Dialogue. We are looking forward to having a robust conversation about elevating the role of agriculture innovation on the global climate agenda. My name is Maggie Lake, and it is my pleasure to be your host today. When it comes to tackling the climate crisis, the focus tends to center on clean energy solutions, but the global food system is a key contributor to emissions, and that's projected to rise steeply as the world population grows. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change found that more than a third of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the production, distribution, and consumption of food. A third. That's a lot. Today, we want to explore how technologies and innovations developed in other sectors can be applied to agriculture to help boost the efficiency and sustainability of our food system and what's needed across policy, research and development, and cross-sector partnerships to help incentivize ag innovation. We have a panel of experts tackling this question from different angles, and we'll hear from them in just a moment. First, a big thank you to the Embassy of the UAE in Washington, D.C. for helping make this event possible. And thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us today. We absolutely want you to be a part of this conversation. So we've reserved part of the program for audience questions. So be sure to send them in. If you're on Zoom, you can click the Q&A button and submit your questions. Please be sure to tell us your name, organization, and where you're writing from. If you are joining us from the live stream or phone, you can email us your questions. The address is at farmpolicy.com. And of course, you're welcome to chime in on social media. We'll be following you there as well. Be sure to use the hashtag #AgInnovationForClimate, and that is the numeral 4. All right, let's get started. We're going to kick things off today with a brief video featuring two on-the-ground perspectives. I had the pleasure of connecting in advance of the event with two farmers working in very different environments with very different sets of resources and tools at their disposal. But there were similarities in the challenges they are facing with regard to growing food in climate-constrained regions and the ingenuity they're bringing to their work. Their names are Roamiso Mashuba. She is a young woman farmer growing snap peas, grains, gum trees, as well as raising pigs in Zimbabwe. She helps rural women combat poverty and malnutrition by empowering and equipping them with skills and knowledge in agriculture, nutrition, markets, technology, and assisting them with access to agro-technology through an input sharing program and collectively purchasing and selling goods and services. And Abdulaziz Al Mullah, based in the UAE, he is a serial investor in disruptive technologies and is committed to addressing the food security challenge. He dedicates time to the region's food ecosystem as a mentor at Savoir Ventures, the Middle East's first accelerator focused on food. Let's hear what they both have to say.
My name is Abdulaziz Al Mullah. I'm the CEO and founder of Madar Farms. We're an agricultural technology startup in the UAE, and our vision is very much focused on tackling food and water security here in the region.
Hello, my name is Roamiso Mashuba. I'm a commercial farmer based in Marondera, Zimbabwe. I also run an organization called Munandi Africa. The vision of Munandi Africa is to end hunger and poverty in rural livelihoods in Zimbabwe. How we do that is through training women farmers on the ground using the traditional field days that people have always used but did not realize that they can impact the community. The second is we help farmers get access to agro-technology, inputs for them to grow better crops, and we also help them collect to sell on a collective model.
A lot of the challenges that we face are actually globally applicable, and I'd say they fall easily into three main areas. Environmental, I think just like the rest of the globe, we're dealing with climate change that is affecting our productivity, but also more so than that, we are in a very arid environment and we have much more limited arable and permanent cropland than the rest of the world, and import dependence is quite large here. It's something that technology has become a bridge for. Secondly, and I think this is also a global phenomenon, is around awareness. The challenge is people know that food is a problem. People know that water security is a problem. But I think the tie-in between those two things and the possibilities of what we can do, that's still at a very low level. And especially when we think about consumer habits and how we can encourage that kind of change. And I think finally is talent. This is a very nascent field on a global basis. And finding talent is particularly hard. Agriculture is not what we're geared or raised to think. It's not about your doctor, lawyer, engineer career pathway. And it's something that we have to work to change and encourage people to think about it as a viable career option, start building the skills we need.
Definitely, I would say the first challenge and that farmers are facing is climate change. The climate has not been very friendly, as you might know. We have had recurring droughts. Last season was one of the first seasons we have had good rains. But for the previous 3 years before that, we had below average rains. So climate change is probably, I would say, number one. Number two is access to finance. Most of the farmers in Zimbabwe are smallholder farmers. So they're on 1 hectare piece of land, and getting finance for when you're a smallholder farmer is very hard. The banks more favor big commercial farming. Number three, I would say access to knowledge. Information is forever changing. But I live in rural Zimbabwe, and it's like just access to internet is very difficult. So you can imagine if the women who I support in the rural communities, they have absolutely no access to internet.
On the environmental side, I think that's where the technology aspect really helps. We always say that we're in the kind of fourth agricultural revolution. And here the introduction of devices like IoT are allowing us to do climate control in a way we weren't able to do before. Hydroponic farming itself has been around for centuries, but the integration of those two solutions, as an example, allows us to not only go indoors, but allows us to optimize growing. And so for us, we're focused on the combination of hydroponic, vertical, and indoor farming. By doing that, we're able to control the climate, we're able to grow things that we weren't able to before, in places we weren't able to before, and much more importantly, we're able to do it in a way that's much more sustainable both for the environment and a much higher quality product for the customer. Internet of Things. So these are basically just devices that are connected to the internet that allow us to access information at a particular point of time. And these are devices that have been predominantly developed for other industries. And this is really the advancement that's happening. It's the introduction of developments that have happened in other industries and looking at how we can start to apply them to agriculture. By using these devices, we're able to control parameters like oxygen, like CO2, like nutrient levels, and give the plants the climate they need at all times. Now, the example I always like to use is if you give your kids the right food, the right sleep, they'll end up being better developed kids physically. And I think of our plants in the same way. They're all my children, and I want them to have what they want at the right amount of time and the right way.
So what we're doing is we're supporting the rural smallholder farmers by training them on various aspects in terms of farming. So we're training them how to farm using climate smart approaches, which involve even the seed varieties that you select, which are better suited for our climate and the changes that are in the environment. We're also working with different partners who are helping us find schemes that will help them get an off-taker agreement for their crops. And we're also helping them access agri-technology. On the farm, we've got equipment that they hire out from the farm. So this is equipment that they would have never been able to access. Before, they would have been using ox-drawn equipment or manual labor, which doesn't give you the correct agronomic requirements that you need to achieve high yields, and also just helping them with collective marketing.
I like to think of an example that's maybe not so obvious. At a university here, New York University in Abu Dhabi, we were working with students around startups and startup coaching, and being able to encourage them to look at some of their devices around artificial intelligence, around data mining, and being able to help them understand that those have applications in agriculture has resulted in a crop of students starting startups in particularly the space. And we're able to offer them a testing ground, we're able to offer them on the ground industry feedback. And that kind of partnership is something that we've looked to replicate not only at a local and regional level, but an international level. I go back to the statement that the industry is very nascent. And so the opportunity for impact, the opportunity for development is so high, and the pace of progress is so high. We just have to show them what's possible in order to excite them to do that.
What partnerships have I established that have helped my work? I've got quite a few different partnerships that I've managed to establish over the years. The first I would speak about is the Global Farmer Network. I've been part of the Global Farmer Network since 2016, and the Global Farmer Network has helped me connect with various stakeholders. That some of them have also helped me just by sharing the story of the work I do and also of my organization. And then Eco and Green, I'm an Eco and Green Fellow. They were the first investor who invested in me as an entrepreneur and helped me meet other partners like Paceable Foundation, which have helped me together with DPA, which that is Distributed Power Africa, to install a solar farm on my farm. I also work with stakeholders in Zimbabwe. These are the input suppliers who supply us the seed that we grow. Seedco is one of them. I also work with some equipment companies, Farmec, various other organizations within Zimbabwe. Also, Zimbabwe Farmers Union, which I'm the chairperson of. The union has really helped me as well, just developing myself as an entrepreneur. So I would say partnerships are very, very important in order to grow as an entrepreneur and to grow your vision.
I think a big step back here is to think about the fact that there is no one-stop solution for agriculture. I think one of the challenges that we face is whenever we see a new development, whether it's in the plant-based space or vertical space or whatever space that may be, it's always touted as kind of a saving grace. That's absolutely not the case. This is such a large problem. What's needed is holistic cooperation across the entire industry. I can grow things much better than other players, but there are things that I can't grow, or I can't grow in a financially feasible manner. And there are lessons that I've learned that I can give to other farmers and other people that are outside of our industry. And so partnerships where we're doing knowledge exchange is what's key here, because the knowledge exchange that's happening is applicable whether you're an indoor farm or whether you're an outside farmer, because some of those learnings are pure operational learnings. And I think getting the institutes such as Global Green Initiative, or whether it's the UN SDG goals, and having these forums is key in sort of driving that forward.
What is needed more in terms of international collaboration to help move sustainable agriculture? Definitely, we need a lot of international collaboration in Zimbabwe. In terms of just access to the latest technologies in terms of sustainable agriculture, this is things like no-till equipment. We need organizations that are designing equipment like that to come up with solutions for smallholder farmers, for our environment, like Zimbabwe. Something I found farming over the years is that access to tools, equipment, is not so easily available. We import a lot of equipment, and a lot of the equipment is made for climates which are in different environments in comparison to Zimbabwe. And a lot of the equipment, some of it is designed for very big farms and can be very costly. So we need equipment that is tailor-made for our scale and our environment, but it's also robust and lasts long. So there's a lot of need for international collaboration in terms of research, a lot of collaboration in terms of coming up with solutions that can help us to become more sustainable as a country.
Aren't they amazing? It's so important to hear that perspective from the ground, from the hard work that's happening there. And I loved what they said about the potential for impact and the pace of change that's happening. What a great way to kick off this discussion. So let's welcome our panel of policy and global food security experts to hear what governments are doing to prioritize agriculture innovation as a way to combat climate change. Please help me welcome right now Hannah Al-Hashimi, head of the Office of the UAE Special Envoy for Climate Change, David Livingston, Senior Advisor to U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry, the U.S. State Department. Jim Barnhart, Assistant to the Administrator Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, USAID, and Jamie Adams, Senior Advisor for International Affairs, Office of the Chief Scientist, USDA. Thanks to everyone for being here today. I'm not sure if we've actually got David yet, but he might be on the phone with us. But welcome, and Hannah, he is. I'd like to start with you. As we heard from both of our farmers, the agriculture sector is facing a host of challenges with climate change sitting right at the top. How does agriculture fit into the UAE climate policy?
Thank you very much, Maggie, for the question. And thank you so very much for having us this morning for you, afternoon over here. It's a true pleasure to join FP and my dear friends from the United States for this timely discussion. I'd like to start, as you did, Maggie, with a bit of context of really why farmers are on the frontier. You know, when we're talking about agriculture, we're talking about a sector that's both intrinsically linked to the climate challenge, both in terms of being affected by the challenge, but also a source of solutions. We're talking about a major global employer with over 2 billion people, a quarter of the world's population employed in the sector, and where women make up about 50% of agricultural workers, particularly in developing countries. We're also talking about, as you mentioned, a third of emissions in food systems overall. And a huge opportunity, in our view, for further advancement of decarbonization, where we haven't really seen the kind of breakthrough that we've seen in the energy sector, and I'll touch on that a little bit different. I think in terms of the way in which we're looking at the climate challenge. I'm speaking to you from London. We're here for the climate ministerial ahead of this year's climate conference, which will be held in Glasgow, where we've really started to take stock of what it is that we need to see really on the road to Glasgow. As the international community, and really there is a clear sense of the need for greater ambition, and that's of course amplified by the climate disasters of even just this week that we're seeing across from Germany to China, to Turkey and other parts of the world, where really it's a clear reminder that we don't only need to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we also need to come up with a better set of technologies, policies, and financing mechanisms to be able to cope with climate change. And this will become even more important as we're looking at an emerging new normal, if you'll excuse the expression, of droughts, altered growing seasons, and harsher weather that simply just doesn't allow us to feed the globe in the way that we've done historically. Just to give context, the floods in China over the last week have destroyed already 55,000 hectares of crops, and that's 5 times the size of Paris if you look at the comparison of areas.
Yeah, Hannah, I just want to jump in for 1 second. And it strikes me, we started with this local view of farming, and in so many ways it still is. And yet this is undoubtedly a global problem, right? We are all affected by this, confronting this, which I think is a really strong link to climate. How, aside from making it a priority, what are some of the policies that you're working on? And I think back to what Abdulaziz said about the speed of change. I mean, these are urgent matters we've got to address. So what are you doing on a policy front to try to really make sure that agriculture is front and center in the climate conversation?
Well, this is really what we're working on with our dear friends from the United States from the global policy perspective. Of course, we mentioned the concerns just now, where we're absolutely also looking to the economic and job opportunities that we see from acting early and acting decisively. And so together, the United Arab Emirates and the United States are working together to prepare and to launch the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, which will be launched in Glasgow this year in November, and has the goal of increasing and accelerating global innovation, research and development on agriculture and food systems in support of climate action. This was something that was announced by President Biden and our Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, at the Leaders Summit on Climate back in April, with support already from Australia, Brazil, Denmark, Israel, Singapore, Uruguay, and the endorsement of the COP26 presidency. And we're delighted that we have additional support as as of yesterday, actually, of Burkina Faso, Colombia, Ghana, Honduras, Hungary, the Republic of Korea, Mexico, the Philippines, Ukraine, and Vietnam. So you'll see this is a diverse group of countries that are coming together really to look at this global challenge and how we can start to unpack the opportunities that we see collectively for economic diversification, for creating knowledge, skills, and jobs, while also contributing practical solutions to this global challenge of climate change.
That 10 more added. I mean, clearly it speaks, I think, to the urgency of it and the knowledge sharing that we heard our farmers talk about as really missing so far. David, why was it important for the U.S. to co-lead and partner on this initiative? How does agriculture fit into the broader climate agenda for the administration?
Well, thank you very much, Maggie, and thanks to Foreign Policy for hosting this event. I mean, obviously, agriculture is a critical part of addressing the climate crisis. And from day one, when the United States, submitted the papers to rejoin the Paris Agreement, took a look at what's needed in terms of ambition and action across multiple different sectors, the agricultural sector jumped out as one that is absolutely pivotal to getting to net zero by mid-century, to addressing not only climate in terms of emissions, but also addressing adaptation and resilience. And yet at the same time, it also jumped out as a sector in which we're crucially not doing enough. Not doing enough in terms of actions today, but also not doing enough in terms of the investments that we need to make to enable greater adaptation and mitigation actions in the future. The role of the agricultural sector in terms of the vulnerability it has at the front lines of the impact of climate change in the years to come, but also its role in terms of its own emissions profile is growing. And yet at the same time, we see that spending on innovation and R&D in the agricultural sector writ large is actually declining. In the United States, many of the inherited assets that we have to, from the investments that were made in the post-war period decades ago that have led to the United States being a true innovative agricultural powerhouse, we're reaching in many cases some of the latter periods of the lifetime of those assets, and indeed even the human capital that we have, is also needs to be reinvigorated, refreshed. And we need to make sure that the agricultural innovation space is an exciting one for those that want to address emissions in the 21st century and the climate challenge of the 21st century. And so for this reason, we thought, well, it's up to the United States then to step up, to work with partners like the UAE to build a coalition to be able to address this challenge, and to do so in a way where, there's really a good news story here. We can have countries making the investments necessary that not only help us with the climate crisis, but also deliver on food security challenges, deliver on broader development challenges. And so there are a lot of co-benefits to be had from this investment. And you see that, by the way, in the diversity of the different countries that have already expressed interest in joining AIM4C. Some of the countries that Hannah just laid out, we have countries in the global north, countries in the global south. We have food importing city-states and food exporting, rural powerhouses with large land mass. There's a wide variety of different profiles here. Each country will have its own innovation priorities, of course, but if we can increase the aggregate amount of spending that we're putting into addressing, emissions and adaptation of the agricultural sector, we can have a big impact in the decades to come.
Yeah, David, something you said really jumped out at me, and that was the fact that investment was going down. I mean, I have covered technology for many, many years and innovation, and rarely did I talk about ag tech or see massive investment flows moving in that direction. Jim, I'm sure this is something that you've been watching with frustration for years. I think that became glaringly obvious during the pandemic when suddenly we were faced with shortages in a way that we just weren't expecting and have not been used to. How is the thinking maybe or the awareness change as a result of some of what we've been through in the last 18 months? I think you're muted, Jim. Hit unmute, please.
No, I'm having March 2020 flashback to the early days of IT here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. All right. I'm using my phone for the audio. Anyway, thank you very much, Maggie and Foreign Policy for pulling us together for this incredibly important discussion. It is something that I do think we need to get more senior people around the world focusing on the role of agriculture and climate change and food insecurity. And in my role as the U.S. government's deputy coordinator for the Feed the Future program that brings together a whole of U.S. government approach to ending poverty, hunger, and malnutrition, we have seen over the last, as you said, 18 months, what an expansion of inequality, inequity, and poverty. It's the first reversal of poverty figures that we've seen in decades, right? And the crisis itself has highlighted the fact that many of between incomes vanishing, food prices increasing, transportation costs rose, and those then interact with other types of engage or activities that are happening around the world. Conflict, right? Conflict is a critical enabler of increasing poverty, hunger, and malnutrition, and it then intersects with climate change. And then last, you have equity and inclusion in our food systems. So when we disregard members of our community simply because of their differences, we leave key stakeholders on the sidelines, and it's particularly true for young people and women. So our data has shown this to be true in the private sector, and it's just as true in the federal government, that when we bring everyone on board, we have a much better chance of getting at the solution. So as the COVID-19 pandemic subsides, challenges like climate change are not going away, right? So we're seeing longer droughts, floods, and more extreme weather events. And it's a structural challenge that's going to be with us for decades. And so we need to think differently, not about a short-term crisis response, not about getting food we have to get food to people who are in crisis, but we also have to think about medium to long-term solutions like the AIM-4C and other programs that we focus on. We see three opportunities here when we look at the problem from our perspective in the Feed the Future program. First is science and technology. The U.S. is a leader in innovation, and we at USAID are working closely with our Feed the Future U.S. government partners like the Department of Agriculture, and it's great to have Jamie here with us today. We're working with USDA to ensure that research investments equip millions of farmers with tools and techniques to become more productive, profitable, and resilient. And to make sure that research and innovation reaches farmers, we're using research coordination hubs to link research programs with the needs on the ground. We're adopting best practices from the private sector, like the product life cycle approach that ensures research innovations are developed from the ground up and with the needs of beneficiaries from the very beginning, right? We definitely have to sync up the pure research with how it affects smallholder farmers around the world. So, with an example for you, with warming temperatures, we've seen more pest outbreaks. They're happening more and more frequently, right? And more intensely, and to the and it has direct effect on the poor farmers who don't have the means to respond. So our Feed the Future program has worked to develop a pest-resistant BT eggplant in Bangladesh, which has led to a 95% reduction in infestations, and we've seen a large uptick in terms of income for those farmers. Let me pause there. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Because I want to make sure.
Moving me on. So go ahead.
That's okay. I know everyone's so passionate about it. I want to make sure that we get through because it's a really big, important topic. And I think, Jamie, this leads us to, Jim was just talking about pests. We heard from our farmers. It's so interesting. They're in different locations, very different situations. They both mentioned climate, but also a host of other challenges that they're facing. Jamie, when we're looking at prioritizing this, what does your research tell us about the challenges around farming and climate? How do we prioritize this innovation we're hoping to unleash?
Yeah, absolutely, Maggie. And thanks again, Maggie and Foreign Policy, for hosting us today. I think that's a really good question. And to echo a lot of what Jim said, the role of science and technology really cannot be understated if we're to achieve our ambitious goals that include food systems that are to provide safe, nutritious, affordable, and accessible food for all. while also enhancing economic viability of farming, advancing equitable livelihoods across food systems, and conserving natural resources and addressing the climate crisis, and as well as creating co-benefits of climate action. We really need to put food, agriculture, and forestry at the center of climate smart practices by building new markets and creating new streams of income for producers and landowners. I believe together we can do more, and agriculture must be part of the solution. Many of these new innovative solutions really do begin with agricultural research and development, cutting edge ag research, utilizing genome editing, artificial intelligence, advanced computing and sensing, just to name a few, all with the promise of generating breakthrough solutions. American farmers are achieving a dramatic increase in productivity with fewer resources by harnessing innovation and technology, by producing more with less. We have a chance to globally address all three dimensions of sustainability: environmental, economic, and social. But to really make a real and lasting improvement to ag and food systems, it's imperative that we come together and support a science-based and data-driven decision-making and innovative solutions that are based on new scientific findings and methods, cutting-edge technologies, embracing critical and emerging technologies such as biotechnology, and Jim mentioned a great example, and sound ecological management approaches. You know, investments in research and development, I cannot say enough, need to be forward-looking and foster a diverse and innovative culture. And these topics are fundamental to the success of not only USDA's research and development, but also the AIM for Climate initiative.
Yeah. You know, Hannah, we want to see these innovations. We want to make sure they're sustainable, right? We don't want to replace an existing problem with a new one. When we come up with these, what kind of technological solutions or opportunities is the UAE hoping to see come out of this global initiative?
Well, I think it's helpful, Maggie, to think of this in terms of analogy. So a sector that we do know very, very well in the UAE is the energy sector. And 15 years ago, we made a strategic decision to invest heavily in partnership with other countries in innovation around low carbon energy. And today, if you fast forward to today, we now have the lowest cost solar power, and that's been a game changer for our industry, providing low carbon, low cost energy. And really, it's the closest thing we've seen in energy to a silver bullet for climate action in the sector. We're really hoping that we can start to see this in the agriculture sector as well. And you know, concurrent with the launch of AIM, our food security minister announced the launch. Actually, our prime minister, together with our food security minister, announced the launch of a food tech valley. So this is what hopes to be a hub for the technologies that you're talking about, based in Dubai, with research and development facilities in an innovation sector, a smart food logistics hub, and areas for vertical farming, which I think really has a lot of potential. Just to talk a little bit more about the technology side, really what we would want to see is technologies that can maximize yields, optimize resource use, reduce emissions, and all really critical to addressing the water, energy, food nexus. We want to see renewable energy displace higher carbon energy in every segment of the food value chain, from water pumping to refrigeration. And we want to develop foods that require minimal amounts of land and water. So one of the technologies that we think is fast proving to be a major solution is vertical farming. You don't need sunlight, soil, or chemicals. It can be hooked up to renewable energy easily. And the technology involves temperature control and humidity regulation that can guarantee large-scale food production throughout the year. We also see a lot of potential through aquaculture, with alternative proteins as a major opportunity area, and other opportunities in irrigation technologies. But new technology is not the only tool. Policies also play a huge role, such as regulating thirsty crops and groundwater withdrawal. And so we're very much looking forward to kind of country-to-country sharing of experiences, in order to make sure that we are creating an environment that enables sustainable food production.
That's right. The advances in vertical farming from when I would first visit have been amazing. I think the water capacity is 30 times more efficient on water, but there is the LED. They've been getting better, but there is that issue that people want to pay attention to. David, I'm curious, what's the role of the private sector in this? You know, I have seen people working on some of these technologies. I think we saw from Abdulaziz the amazing things he talked about in terms of technical revolutions, which we know, the Internet of Things, AI, machine learning, that we know all come from the private sector. How do they fit into this equation and these initiatives? Are you looking to incentivize them, to partner with them, to subsidize them? What's the partnership between government and private sector look like here?
Well, thank you. I mean, Maggie, let me just say that if we're successful with the broader U.S. government agenda, what we're doing here, in the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate's office, we're successful in what the State Department's doing, what USDA is doing, what USAID is doing, then it means that what we'll do is we'll take the very best of the private sector in the United States and globally. We will drive new innovations, new efficiencies in the food sector and the agricultural sector. And that will not just drive economic growth, that will not just drive development, but that will ultimately save lives because it will get more food produced in harsher climates, to the people who need it, quicker, faster, and more effectively. Now, what will that take? It'll take, honestly, a very broad and expansive, remit and view of what private sector engagement looks like as well. This means engaging with the incumbent players that have been a part of this dialogue for many years. It also means reaching out to some of the new upstarts, the new kids on the block, so to speak, in food tech, in ag tech, in unlikely places, right? It means taking a look at bringing orthogonal innovations in other sectors and applying them to some of our food and agricultural technology challenges. I like to say that if we're very successful with this initiative, when people hear the phrase clean tech, they won't just think of wind turbines, solar panels, Teslas, and energy storage. They're going to be thinking about that next generation of food technology and agricultural technology that can help us reduce emissions from our food sector and help deliver more resilient and better adapted, food systems for a warming climate. That's ultimately what we also want to generate excitement about and what we want folks to think about when they think about clean tech. Now, with our agriculture innovation mission for climate, let me just say that, we envision a couple of really intriguing ways in which the private sector companies can plug in. It can be through, let's say, engaging in what we're, nominally for now calling innovation sprints that would allow companies to work with a set of countries that, volunteer themselves to focus on a certain area. Let's say it's a low carbon fertilizer that has a certain performance, or let's say it's the next generation of flexible thin film solar married to desalination or irrigation that's then integrated into agricultural system. If we can have the private sector working with willing companies, all putting resources towards that goal with a clear defined metric, that not only focuses minds on the eventual target that we're actually seeking to reach in a clearly defined way where it's not just abstract, but it also ensures that we're mobilizing different resources from the appropriate actors to get there. And that when that technology is developed, you've got a private sector actor that has some a horizontal reach across the sector globally that can work with those countries that also have the deep vertical reach within their own society. And so ideally creating that kind of lattice framework from the get-go on very specific, well-defined innovation sprint priorities is a really important way in which we view the private sector being able to work within the agriculture innovation mission for climate initiative.
David, I think this is so interesting what you say in this sort of vertical or lattice approach, because a lot of the questions we're getting, and Jim and Jamie, I think I both want you to weigh in on this, is I think assessing the local needs or sort of managing this around local populations. We have Klaus who's talking about that needs analysis as a first step. We have a few questions coming in from India that they've done a lot of work on sustainability. They see great progress here. We have someone from Central American Studies, Richard, talking about the greatest synergy between agriculture and climate is soil health. How is carbonation of soil being incentivized? In some ways, these issues vary. Jim, how can we best make sure that we are addressing the local need as we sort of plug into, I think, what we can call a global, the global knowledge pool that we're bringing together with an initiative like this?
Yeah, great question, Maggie, and it speaks to the heart of the soul of us as an agency. USAID's thousands of personnel local staff and U.S. Foreign Service officers and then implementing partners are working out in the field, doing exactly what David was talking about and you were talking about, working their best with local partners, public sector, private sector, civil society, to try to harness both local level innovation, but also then, as David was talking about, that lattice work, figuring out what's a global innovation that would work in this particular context. It's a challenge for us, particularly based in headquarters, to make sure that what we do stays relevant to those smallholder farmers. I mean, we can't forget, smallholder farmers in Africa account for or medium and small enterprises in Africa account for 60% of agriculture production. But they face a $65 billion shortfall in funding, right? $65 billion is needed to upgrade and help these agriculture-based SMEs operate. So the sustainable model is not going to be one that's based on USAID working with partners solely. We have to have private sector, we have to have local governments, we have to have national governments, we have to have international organizations, we have to have initiatives such as Aim4C that bring a diverse group of people that are able to both bring expertise, experience, and resources to bear, and particularly the private sector in this case. And we are working quite hard to both connect our international partners, our international private sector firms that work in the ag field with local, both regional and domestic operators in the countries where we operate. I want to give you just one example, and then just feel free to interrupt me whenever you want, Maggie. I'm fine. But
Sure.
We're partnering right now with an organization called Aceli Africa, and with the goal of addressing this financing gap. So the idea is that we're going to raise up to $700 million for 750 agribusinesses in Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda. So Aceli, the program incentivizes commercial lenders to make loans to environmentally sustainable and activities that emphasizes local production. And then it prioritizes underserved populations. Because again, we can't lose sight of the fact that we have this incredible untapped resource out there, which are women, youth, and other marginalized populations, that if we're able to bring them into the center of this dialogue and this activity and give them agency, we could see an immediate uptick in both reducing poverty and reducing malnutrition.
Yeah, Jim, I am going to jump in, and I just want to say that you bring up an excellent point. Rora Miso, if you remember in the video, one of the things she pointed out as a challenge is access to financing and access to knowledge, being something as simple as internet connection to help aid these local farmers. I mean, so, we see so much connectivity. It's not ever just one issue, is it? We need a multi-pronged approach, I think. And that brings me to jobs, and I'm going to get to that in a second as another challenge in terms of the talent development, which we need to think about when we're thinking about innovation, especially ag tech. But Jamie, I did want to ask you, we're getting a lot of questions. I think we have some potential participants in the innovation sprints online on our questions, because we're getting really specific ones that are far above my agricultural knowledge, as much as I've covered vertical farming in my career. So Jamie, I'm going to ask you to weigh in here, but please let me know if any of this we need to defer. And that is, can we talk more about soil and land degradation in relation to climate change? A lot of people asking questions about soil. That seems, when we're talking about ag tech, I think people have these ideas of what certain things look like, but there are so many issues we need to dig into. Do you have any comment about that? And does that apply when we're talking about tech and the tech innovations we want to see? Is that an area that's critical in this discussion?
Absolutely. I mean, there's still so much that's unknown about the soil, and soil research is such a critical part of all of that we've been talking about today. And if I could go back to your earlier point too about local, and really just want to highlight too that research transcends borders. It's a global enterprise that's really fueled by collaboration. And we have researchers all around the world that collaborate daily on local, regional, and national challenges. So I really want to reiterate that that is one of the fundamental reasons why the United States is so excited to be partnering with the United Arab Emirates on the launch of AIM for Climate. Because one of the things that the scope of the initiative includes, as well as many of these areas of research that are coming up in the Q&A, it really has an element of focus on something that's often overlooked, that not only do we do international research and development in the context of development itself, but each country usually has, excuse me, national level government, agriculture, R&D, and academic research institutions that are focused on those national challenges. And those national challenges, as I mentioned earlier, the research, the solutions, the innovation that permeates from those really will transcend borders. And we see it all the time, and in many of the examples that Jim mentioned. So USDA, we look forward to sharing knowledge and best practices, which is a critical component, one of the objectives of AIM for Climate, to increase the equitable diffusion of and positive returns to ag innovation efforts focused on adapting and mitigating the effects of climate change.
Jamie, can I, if we're using vocabulary from another industry, I mean, we're all used to hearing the pharmaceutical companies and talking about the pipeline. What's in the pipeline? How promising is the pipeline? Is that, can that translate into agriculture? Should we be talking about the tech pipeline for agriculture?
Absolutely. So research and development pipelines exist in many different sectors. And so it's a critical point that you raised, Maggie, that there is an agriculture research and development pipeline. It's the same type of pipeline that exists, as you mentioned, in all other sorts of tech industries. You've got your basic and your applied, and you have your tech transfer and your extension systems that are moving those solutions out and deploying and scaling in the field. And so very much so, and that's why it's fundamentally important that AIM for Climate brings all the components of what we call the research and development enterprise together under that umbrella. And so that it's all included within the scope of AIM for Climate.
Yeah, I think that's important. Whenever we talk about the SDGs, we talk about the importance of having common language, common standards. And I think when you're looking to attract investment dollars, that's really important to talk about things in the way that perhaps we talk about them in other industries where we're used to assessing the promise and pulling VC money into it, frankly. Hannah, we heard the CEO of Matter Farms say that talent was one of the main concerns. And I thought that was so interesting. He said, to paraphrase, that we're raised to be lawyers and doctors and bankers. We're just not really raised to think about farming as a career. How important is that piece in this puzzle, and how is the government approaching that problem?
Well, thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Maggie. I think the future of work, really, when you think about it, is a global challenge. So this isn't anything in any way unique to the UAE. But I also think that the talent required in the agricultural sector would also need to evolve to meet the other megatrends that we're seeing, including that of climate action. So in terms of direct policies, one of the recent initiatives we've launched has been the Ministry of Possibilities. This is an idea basically to look at what's seen as impossible challenges and start to see how we can start to find solutions for them. And through this, we're looking at the future of talent as kind of a challenge across government on how to sort of skill, reskill, identify, and then ensure that talent is in the right places. I think for agriculture, while at the moment it's not the largest contributor to the GDP, there's definitely a lot of initiatives, including the Food Tech Valley, or we think that it could certainly contribute a much larger part than it currently does in the future. And really, when we're thinking more broadly of opportunities or sectors that can contribute to climate action, the way we're seeing this, Maggie, is really as an opportunity for economic diversification and development. We're a young country. We celebrate our Golden Jubilee and our 50th anniversary this year, and we mark that by looking towards the next 50 years and what we'll need really to be able to to enable a happy and healthy environment for present and future generations. And for that, I think AgTech and food systems will be crucial. Some of the concrete things that we are doing, and we're hoping to include international participation in, is innovation and investment around the sector, as mentioned. Perhaps some more specific things, in addition to the Food Tech Valley, are, for example, the investment office of Abu Dhabi has invested already $100 million into 4 AgTech companies. Madar Farm is one of them. Aero Farms, which is a New Jersey-based vertical farming company that's building a massive new research and development center in Abu Dhabi, is another. RDI, a startup developing a new irrigation system that grows plants in sandy soil. And RNZ, which is a startup that develops fertilizers that make it possible to grow more food with fewer resources. And as we continue to see the climate crisis develop, that's something that will become increasingly important, how to do more with less. We're also looking at investments as the first and larger $272 million program to support AgTech. So we're really looking at this as an investment opportunity, as a partnership opportunity, and one that hopefully will lead to our nation's growth, which of course includes then the talent needed to drive that growth moving forward.
Hannah, I'm so interested to hear you mention Aero Farms. I'm coming to you from the great state of New Jersey and have been keenly watching what they have been up to. So I'm so interested to hear about their partnership. David, we have some questions coming in. This is from Emily. You mentioned opportunities for the private sector to be involved in AIMC. What about civil society and NGOs? Will they have an opportunity to be stakeholders? And also a question about alternative proteins as an innovation priority. What's the U.S. stance and how do they fit into the program as well? David.
Absolutely. And let me just say, I mean, I view this as actually intrinsically linked to the previous question, also about creating the workforce of the future in the agricultural sector to be able to thrive in a climate driven future. There's absolutely going to be a role for educational institutions, NGOs, international organizations as knowledge partners that help to amplify the impact of this increased investment in climate smart agriculture, R&D, and innovation. So number one, make sure that for every additional dollar, for every additional, rial or Thai baht or yen that we're spending on climate smart agriculture innovation, how do we maximize the impact of it? And how do we coordinate so that we're not duplicating efforts, but we're working in as synergistic a way as possible? That's going to be difficult to do without bringing on board some of the most promising knowledge partners out there. So again, those international organizations, those NGOs, and then also, once we have those innovations, disseminating them as broadly and as effectively as possible. And again, this is where non-governmental institutions oftentimes have a reach on the ground, understand the nuance of a local market, of the local societal dynamics in a way which can make the dissemination of those technologies much more effective. And then again, to circle back to that point about the labor force, let me just say that if we are going to take our agricultural sector today, infuse it with innovative thinking, innovative approaches, innovative processes, and new technologies, that's also an agricultural sector which is going to need to train up and increase also the investment in training and education for that workforce. It's going to create a workforce which is coming out of this process actually better paid, actually better trained, actually has skills which have broad applicability outside of the agricultural sector as well. And that's going to involve, at least from a United States perspective, the recruitment of educational institutions, partnerships with universities, with community colleges, et cetera, to create that training and to create that integrated, from the upstream R&D to the actual practical application, out in the field, so to speak. And so that's a critical role as well. Now, when it comes to alternative proteins, the second question, this is something I'm personally very excited about. As a aspiring vegetarian myself, I've been amazed at the advancement that we've had in alternative proteins of all sorts. I remember one of the burger substitutes, trying it for the first time actually at a private event, outside of the Paris Climate Conference in 2015, and thinking to myself, well, this will take at least a decade to even start to enter the market. Now you have major restaurant chains in the United States that are offering these alternative proteins, these alternative, burgers on their menu, et cetera, just 5 years later, just 5 or 6 years later, far faster than I ever would have imagined. Now, obviously there are highly attractive elements of some of these, alternative protein innovations. What is their ultimate climate impact? I think there's, more work to be done on many of those fronts, but by putting it in a framework in which we can drive innovation towards what's already good and promising about these innovations, but drive that investment towards ensuring that they're also contributing to lower emissions and to a more resilient food systems going forward, then we can piggyback on some innovative trends that are already starting to accelerate, that are already starting to attract venture capital, and just redirect that government innovation spending in a way that ensures that they also deliver on our climate priorities.
And I think that's a great point, David. And as all of these countries who are now partnering on this initiative come together, putting safeguards in place so that the innovation is sustainable is going to be absolutely critical if it's going to have credibility. Jamie, we're just about to wrap up. I just want to give you the last word. We have such an interesting, we've been talking so much about the innovation. We have an interesting question from Sylvia from Toronto, Canada, and that is any work being done with the end user in terms of shifts in thinking of choosing different, more sustainable foods that are just as nutritious? I mean, in a way, there is a sort of learning curve and a PR effort that's going to have to involve consumers as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Maggie. We really do need everyone in the ag sector, including consumers, at the table to develop solutions. Ultimately, the solutions that are going to come out of that research and development enterprise, that pipeline that we talked about earlier, what hits the market and what becomes viable, that's going to be determined by consumers around the world. But ultimately, as David said, we do need to make sure that those innovations remain targeted, that they are focused in on reducing emissions, sequestering carbon, and helping food systems adapt to climate change. But it's critical that we need to recognize as well that consumers around the world have different palates, they have different nutritional needs. So we do need a full plate of options coming out of the pipeline, and consumer involvement and incorporating consumer preference into that process is critically important.
Well, it's certainly absolutely important that these two subjects are tied together, and so grateful to hear that there is the attention being put on this so that we can make progress while we're having this larger discussion around climate change. We're going to have to leave it there, but I wanted to thank all of our panelists for joining us. I know we have a lot more news coming through. There were some programs that were mentioned that the viewers would like to know about, and we will be sure to share all of those resources and, of course, keep everyone up to date on what's going on. I don't know, David, Hannah, if you have any suggestions for those innovators who are out there who are very excited to hear about this. How is it best for us to follow along and find out about more updates? We will certainly update on the foreign policy side, but any recommendations on how we can find out what's happening with this initiative?
Well, absolutely. Stay tuned, Maggie. We are working on a way to share more information. We'd love to be able to share it with participants, perhaps through FP, and to keep engaging with you moving forward. We'll certainly have a lot more concrete after Glasgow once we have a greater idea of how this will shape up. But David might have more to add on that. Thank you.
That's right. We're going to have more of a digital footprint soon that I think will be very useful in terms of engaging all of our interested non-governmental stakeholders as well as governmental stakeholders. We're going to have a more structured and targeted outreach to the private sectors, to civil society as well over the coming months. So stay tuned, watch this space. We are just delighted to see all the enthusiasm coming through in the questions and the engagement in the Q&A box. So please keep watching this space. Stay excited and enthusiastic about the possibilities of AIM for Climate, and we'll look forward to being in touch with so many of the interested institutions and individuals in the weeks ahead.
Fantastic. Well, Jamie, Jim, Hannah, and David, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll hold you to that promise and come back to this topic again. Thank you so much. And a big thanks again to the Embassy of the UAE for supporting this event. There is so much more to explore when we're talking about the intersection of climate change and agriculture, its impact on local communities, and how global partnerships can harness the resources in innovation potential in technology and other sectors to develop climate resilience. We are going to have more events coming up in this series. In September, we'll be looking at the challenges of water scarcity and how to secure our most precious resource for the future. Stay tuned for updates on that later this summer. A full recording of this event will be available shortly on FP's event page at foreignpolicy.com/events. I know people were asking for the resources, so you can find some of the programs that were specifically mentioned there. And there's more to come from FP this week. Join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. as we explore, can think tanks save democracy? This event will also launch the release of the newest report by FP Analytics about the role and impact of local think tanks in advancing policy reform and strengthening democratic governance in uncertain times. That is Wednesday, July 28th at 11 a.m. Eastern. Stay tuned for updates and find out more at foreignpolicy.com/events. Again, thanks so much for watching. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.